Back again. I didn't realize that with this free option that it only recorded for 10 minutes. So starting over again, I'll see if I can move a little bit faster. Sometimes when you're talking literature, it takes a little longer than you want it to. So going back to paragraph 13, I really don't like how this keeps on skipping back. Or I'm sorry, 14, talks about the flow of the river and the whispering of the wind marked time. Well, if you scroll back up and you go to paragraph 8, you can remember that you were also told that when people, newcomers specifically, visited New Mexico, that time moved slowly for them. And coming down here, when he talks about there was only the flow of the river and the whispering of the wind marked time, it was, again, time stood still. But why do you think time stood still? Well, one of the reasons time stood still is there is no technology, not a big city, it's nature, right? And this is that big connection that the author is wanting us to see about people then and people today. You know, like there was a magic that existed that doesn't exist today. Lost today. So going back to paragraph, moving on to 15 actually at this point. So he gives you a few examples of things that he remembers about his grandfather. So up here, he's giving you direct characterization. Now he's going to give you some direct stories here, but this is where we're getting into inference. So he tells you that, you know, you could say, oh, well, his grandfather helped him and he took mud and he covered up his ant bites. So that shows that he is a kind person. Now, that's a very basic way of looking at this. But what you want to look at is here's the advice that his grandfather gave him. And he said, watch where you stand. And to this right here, do you think that he was saying that because at any point in this kid's life, you know, he needed to worry about an anthill? This is timeless advice that can apply to any event in his life. This could be where he stands with issues in society, with people, etc. This is that be careful and watch what you're doing. And this isn't just ants. This is something much deeper. And that's what this author is wanting you to know. This is what we're looking at. When we get into high school reading and what 8th graders should understand, this is what we're looking at. So paragraph 15, what I would do if I were you on paragraph 15 is I would go ahead and I would write, that's really ugly. I would write example next to this right here. So I'm going to draw my E, put an X because this ant the anthill is a much more valuable piece of advice than just, you know, watching out for ants. So I came down here and I wrote example as well, and we'll go ahead and move on from there because what I'm wanting you guys to see is the second example. So we'll leave example here. And he talks about, you know, during a drought. So a dry summer, the river dried to a trickle. That's their drought that he's talking about. He said that, you know, all the plants are dying and his, you know, sadness with an impulse, he said, I wish it would rain. So this is what we would call, he said in vain that he wished. That's your key word for rain. Now, something else he's mentioned, and this is why he keeps on mentioning the curandera, is he's talking about this faithfulness, this spirituality that exists with this older generation that is just gone with our generation today. And his grandfather, he says, I wish it would rain. And grandfather touched him, looked up to the sky, and he said, pray for rain. And this is important because his grandfather has a connection with the earth. It's just like, say something that you mean. So, we wish for things all the time, but, rather than wishing, what his grandfather was saying is, pray for it, so it'll come to you. And this is that deep spirituality that exists in the ancient history of his descendants. It's anyone coming to this country, spirituality that is there. In modern times, it's transferred into, obviously modern religions. And that's why he mentions the Kachina earlier, and then he said the saints, because it's this, don't just say you want something, ask meaningly for it. And he goes on, and he said, for him, language, there was a difference. So you have the wish, you have the pray with the grandfather, and again, he felt connections to this cycle. So this is that cycle of life that exists. I'm going to get rid of this stuff because it is driving me crazy. But make sure next to paragraphs 15 and 16 you have example written. I thought it would stay, obviously it didn't. So coming back, another important part is he was a participant with the forces that filled our world. He was not a bystander. So this is that connection to the earth and world that is, again, it's dwindling today. Dwindling, it doesn't exist. People, there's less farming, there's less connection to the world. I mean, we are just a completely different place. And that's kind of the thesis of this author is, we really need to look at how things were to kind of examine where we are going today. So this right here is, rain, you have ants, and now he has death. And so what you're going to want to do is next to paragraph 17, just like we did, next to paragraphs 15 and 16, you're going to want to write example. Because this one is what his grandfather taught him about death. And your key word here is tragic, I mean, death for some people is easy to understand, but for others, it's very difficult to understand, especially when someone's been taken in a very tragic accident and they're very young, because we understand that when you get older you should pass away, but when somebody is young and passes away, it's that much harder, especially when they experience something so horrible as being dragged by a horse. And this is his friend, and it's hard for young people to grasp death because death is something that's common to adults, by the time you're my age. Not, and I don't even think it's common, but you understand it because you've experienced probably by this point. But he didn't understand death. And I think about what I was told when I was growing up about death. And it makes me, when I'm reading this, that's what I'm connecting to, because when you read, you always want to go back to like what you know as a person to help you to understand where the author is going with his piece. And so he said he took him aside and he said, "Think of the death of the trees, the fields in the fall. The leaves fall and everything rests as if dead. But they bloom again in the spring. Death is only the small transformation in life." And again, just like you had in past paragraphs, this is this cycle of life. With life comes death, and with death comes life. It is a normal cycle we all go through, just like nature. He has this connection to nature, but he's pointing out to his grandson, how our natural world kind of reflects, our world. So these are the things I remember, these fleeting images, few words. But even with a few words, he had a very meaningful impact. So I'm going to go ahead and just highlight that, because if I go back, I want to see few words and I want to understand where I was going with that. And then I'm going to erase the stuff. Seriously, Screencastify, it would be great if it would just stay in place. Now see that is not possible. So I remember him driving his horse-drawn wagon into Santa Rosa in the fall when he brought his harvest produce to sell in the town. What a tower of strength. Again, this is that giant that his grandfather was for him. A giant, that powerful and strong man was. The small man huddled in the seat of that giant wagon. One click of his tongue, and the horses obeyed, stopped or turned as he wished. He never raised a whip. How unlike today when so much teaching is done with loud words and threatening hands. Ooh, this is really powerful right here. Because what he's saying is, he spoke in few words with calm emotions and made his point. A lesson today. And I know, as a teacher, sometimes I'm real persnickety and I put people in their place because I want to make sure everyone's paying attention and no one's distracted. But I think it's a very human thing. If you think about how, people interact with one another, every single one of us at some point has, been frustrated and has not handled situations, in the right way. And if you kind of look at, the way our world is today, I mean, you have a lot of emotion and you have a lot of anger that exists. But, if he wanted something done, he could calm his emotions, unlike the way that we handle things today. And that's really important to note. And he would say, "Buenos dias, le de Dios vuelo." And I would say, "Buenos dias, te de Dios mi hijo." He would answer and smile. And that's their interaction. How many of us get to spend time with our grandparents like this? I mean, we live in such a fast world. And that basic exchange of respect. I mean, this is something that, we today learn from him. And again, you have his mention, he goes on in paragraph 20, and he, at this point, he's called him, a giant, and he's called him a tower of strength. And then, here he says, "I became a king as I rode next to the old man who smelled of earth and sweat and the other deep aromas from the orchards and fields of Puerto de Luna." So this is a sign of respect, and he's proud of his family. Pride in his family. And that matters. How many families today, interact in such different ways? Today people are so busy, we spend less time interacting. The author wants us to see that, these interactions mattered, and that's where the story is really going.